Will the new emerging multipolarity have the same weakness or the strengths of the old multipolarity of the previous years? Here, much depends on China. If China believes and acts in the larger global good to use its power and influence to share benefits rather than seek dominance, in the same manner that the dominant powers of the Western world used their dominance over the past 2 centuries, then that is one way to go. However, if there is a resurgence of hegemony, replacing old hegemony by new hegemony by any power, we for one, India will resist, and I'm sure that will be the case for Russia as well. Last, to summarize, the title of our session, is it a symphony? Of course not. It's not a symphony, because it's what we now call strategic autonomy. Let me give you a practical example. Last week, we bid farewell to the last squadrons of the MiG-21s, which were there in the Indian Air Force. It was an emotional farewell attended by our defense minister. The reason I mentioned the MiG-21s was it was given to us, to India, by the Soviet Union in 1962. We got our first fleet in 63, which was the first manifestation of the exercise of multipolarity by India. We wanted supersonic fighter aircraft from the British, the French, or the Americans. Those were not on offer to us. We exercised the attribute of independence and sovereignty. We reached out to the possibilities of a multipolar world during a bipolar world system, and we got the MiG-21s 63 years ago. This is what I want to mention, that India, the quest for multipolarity has been an ever-present attribute of Indian foreign policy. It's manifested itself in its national policies, in the non-aligned movement, what we call strategic autonomy. The seeds of multipolarity can be found, must be found in the height of unipolarity. My good friend has mentioned the quest for the BRICS, Russia, India, China, which came about by the visionary statement of Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Primakov. And we see that multipolarity is rising, but we must also notice that the quest for reintroducing unipolarity, reassertion of unipolarity, is also on the rise today. The US is in the process of reasserting its dominance, first on its own allies. Evidence of this is the US dominance on NATO and the defense spending of 5%, making Europe and the United States, NATO to put together, one of the largest military spenders in the world. It is also true in trade, tech, and relations to notions of European security. Therefore, multipolarity is not a unilinear progress, nor is it irreversible. The second point I want to mention is multipolarity is also multidimensional. Along military, economic, and trade and technological levels, even demographic dimensions, there are multiple dimensions of power resisting, aligning in the same direction all at the same time, in fact, assures and ensures the survival of multipolarity. This leads to some interesting trends. In military terms, there is consolidation of alliances, be it NATO or the US role in the Middle East or AUKUS. But the trends for a global trade tell a different picture. US is using tariffs as a tool of multipolarity, creating competition among suppliers seeking access to the US market. Trade is impacted through geopolitical competition, but trade finds its own water. US and EU are the biggest trade partners of China, even while China has now more trade with the developing world rather than with the developed world. India and Brazil trade cut across geopolitical divides. Global trade is pulled in different directions. Access, markets, profit margins pull in one direction, and tendency of seeking safety through geopolitically closer partners through so-called friendshoring, decoupling, and de-risking in another direction. However, here too, the results are unexpected. India wanted to diversify its API sources for its pharma industry, and now we have been met by 100% tariffs from the United States. Multipolarity is not just at the global level, it's also regional. The diffusion of power, resources, and markets mean that the story is not just about China's rise, but also regional powers like India, which is today the fastest growing economy in the world amongst the major countries. Southeast Asia, Gulf, Turkey, key countries in Central Asia, Africa, and Latin America. There are also pockets of dominance that create extraordinary leverage and power. The US, despite all the talk of its decline, is still dominant in many areas. The US dollar, despite self-inflicted damage, still accounts for 88% of foreign exchange transactions, 66% of international debt, 60% of international payments, and about half foreign exchange reserve trade invoices and international loans. China has seen an extraordinary growth. It's the largest manufacturing country in the world, the largest navy, and a near monopoly in critical areas. It is commanding lead in mineral production, aerospace, industrial, and defense applications, and near total dominance in refining of minerals. Seventh, the impact of technology. This is a dual impact. Technology allows for diffusion of power and thus creates the basis for multipolarity, but at the same time, it exacerbates existing hierarchies. Geopolitics shapes multipolarity more than global interdependence. This means that conflict is more often driven by shaping of multipolarity rather than cooperative power sharing. However, much of the diffusion of power promotes multipolarity. Thus, we see the impact of Russia's military operations in Ukraine having an impact far beyond the immediate conflict zone. India has been, for instance, caught up in the crossfire between Russia and the US and Europe related to the Ukraine conflict. That China has not been imposed 25% additional tariffs like on India for importing Russian crude shows the double standards that are clearly at play. Maybe our Chinese colleague can tell us the secret success that China has with the United States by avoiding 25% additional tariffs like India has been imposed upon. Institutional rule-based systems are slow to adapt. Multipolarity induces changes, but they become immobile rather than nimble. The case for reform of the United Nations Security Council is pending for many years. We have considerable sympathy for Russia, which has great store for the Security Council permanent membership, but three of its members are almost at continuous conflict and war with Russia. Our sympathies with Russia. SCO and BRICS have got a new life in terms of membership, but less so in terms of agreed purpose. As the incoming chair of BRICS, India hopes it will defend the multilateral system and focus on energy security, food security, and developmental aids. The G20 wants the hope of revitalized multipolarity is also slowing down. My last point. Will the new emerging multipolarity have the same weakness or the strengths of the old multipolarity of the previous years? Here, much depends on China. If China believes and acts in the larger global good to use its power and influence to share benefits rather than seek dominance, in the same manner that the dominant powers of the Western world used their dominance over the past 2 centuries, then that is one way to go. However, if there is a resurgence of hegemony, replacing old hegemony by new hegemony by any power, we for one, India will resist, and I'm sure that will be the case for Russia as well. Last, to summarize the title of our session, is it a symphony? Of course not. It's not a symphony because it needs a single dominant conductor. Is it anarchy? No. The multiple emerging powers require a certain level of stability for their rise, unlike established powers which believe erroneously that their risk levels are tolerable. This is a misnomer. Therefore, multipolarity is characterized both by conflict and cooperation. It is to the interests of countries like India, and I believe Russia, that cooperation can take precedence over conflict. Here we would like to suggest the earliest possible resolution of, for example, the Ukraine conflict or the Middle East conflict, because through dialogue and diplomacy, the interests of multipolarity are served rather than through the use of military force. Thank you.